Well, without further ado, let's jump right in. Tonight is one of our TCC Masterclass webinar series, and we're so excited to have Nathan and Brad with us. The title of this session is Real Talk for Restorative Practices, and real is going to be a theme throughout, talking about what does this look like in the real world, and what are some things that you can really take away and use. These two wonderful men have been working with the idea of restorative practices since about 2008 and have partnered in many ways. They've created Behavior Flip, which I know many of you are fans of. If you're not, start Googling that right now to find out more. They, I'm sure, are willing to tell you more. And they are the authors of one of my new favorite books, Hacking School Discipline. If you don't have your copy or copies yet, it's time to get on and buy those. But like I said, we're just so glad to have them with us, giving their time. We're so glad to have all of you willing to share your time. We are the core collaborative, and that collaborative piece is very important. Take a quick picture or a screenshot of this page, and it'll remind you of some ways you can get in touch with us later. You can always reach out to me at isaac@thecorecollaborative.com with any thoughts or questions about this webinar series. And again, here we have the book, and then these two are very busy on Twitter. So take a quick screenshot or picture of those and check in with them, and check in with their Facebook site, Hacking School Discipline, and again with Behavior Flip for the same kind of great information and tips and hints that you're going to hear tonight. Here, a quick way you can connect directly with them. If you don't want to search each thing individually, take a quick scan or take a picture of that bit.ly link, and you'll be able to connect with them in many ways. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Brad and Nathan, our Hacking School Discipline gurus.
All right, well, welcome everyone. We're going to start with just a brief overview of our book. We're really excited to talk to you all. We've been really excited about the book. We honestly are just amazed at how many people have read it so far and how far it's spread, and that we're talking to you tonight. And our book is really divided into 9 hacks. And one of the main differences, I think, between our book and what is traditional, restorative practices is that we look at a few more aspects of it. So when you look at our little sketch note here by Julie Woodard, who's great, by the way, at making sketch notes, what you see is that we also focus on growth mindset, mindfulness, and we also look at the positive aspects and the proactive aspects of the discipline. It's not just what do you do when a kid does something wrong. We look at many more facets and aspects of that. All right, so one of the things that I'm actually in Reno, Nevada, because they have new law here that I'm here to talk about and to work with them with, and I'm in my hotel room right now, about to do a speech with them tomorrow. So one of the new laws is happening right here in Nevada. So if you could click on that, what it is in this new law here, and this is coming not just here, this is happening in a lot of places. The laws are starting to change. Special education students can't be suspended more than 5 days per occurrence is one of the big things that they're doing here. Students under 11 cannot be expelled, and you cannot remove students for truancy. So there's a whole lot of things coming, and people are trying to figure out, how do I actually do that, and how do we react to that? And a lot of these components you have to have a restorative plan of action for a kid when they do get suspended or expelled, which is another big change. Now, if you click on the next one, in California, and this is also happening in other states too. I know there's some things coming out from other states that are similar to this, but essentially you can't suspend students for willfully defying the valid authority of an adult. So basically, if a student refuses to do what you want them to do, you cannot suspend for that anymore. And these are big things coming that people are like, man, what am I going to do if a student does this? And what can I do to make this something that the student actually doesn't do in the first place? So that's what we're going to talk about with the proactive components. And you can go on and scroll on to the next slide.
All right. Well, thanks for joining in with us. My name is Nathan Maynard. So I'm going to go ahead and get started with some of the need of restorative practices. You can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So the 3 things that I want to hit today, the first one is that I would like to focus on is why do kids act out? So go ahead and take about 30 seconds in the chat and write, why do you think kids are acting out? What are a couple different reasons why kids are acting out? I'll go ahead and give you 30 seconds.
They're flying in. The work is hard, problems at home, issues with communication, feelings of frustration, boredom, not feeling that they belong, multiple types of trauma are being listed, and lots of repeats about needing attention or seeking attention or not having the positive attention they feel they need. Sometimes things like being not just starving for attention, but being hungry or not having developed coping skills.
That's great. That's great. And they can keep coming in. So I'm going to go over the 3 main reasons from psychology today that kids are acting out and how restorative practices help support those 3. The first one is power. The first reason kids are acting out is because they want some sort of power. We know as educators, as admin, as parents, you know, we have to have that control in that classroom, in the home, what that looks like. So again, kids are seeking out what that power looks like. Sometimes it's about giving them choices, giving them 2 different choices. Both of those choices are something we're comfortable with them doing. So you can either sit over here or you can sit over there. Both of those I'm fine with at that time. That's still giving them some of that power. Voice and choice, we hear that a lot on social media, in the news about giving kids voice and choice. But what does that really look like? We're going to go over a little bit later about how you can give kids voice and choice in the classroom through some of the proactive natures of building up a circle and some of these different ways that they can choose different places that they want to interact with in the classroom through collaboration or what that would look like. The second reason is needs aren't being met. And I heard a lot of that from some of those comments that I was reading through, as well as Isaac saying. A lot of times needs aren't being met. When we look at discipline in a punitive nature, it's not giving those kids a chance to seek to understand. There's a lot of studies out there right now that shows the populations of students that are getting more wrapped up in the punitive systems. And a lot of times those are the kids that need the most help. So even when Brad was going over some of those new laws that are changing, some of those laws might be focusing on some of these kids that may need more help, and they want to see what they can do to help those kids out. Again, we got to focus on that power, that control of that classroom, and making sure we give a little bit, but make sure it's in our control, as well as what can we do to seek to understand behind these acting out behaviors. The last one is attention, and I think that's the biggest one that I saw pop up there, and we all have dealt with that before, attention-seeking behaviors and what that looks like. What we really want to do with attention is we want to make sure that we are keeping an equitable class, and sometimes when that's collaboration or even through these circles. And we'll talk about circles in just a little bit, but with those circles, it's really giving all those kids in that classroom a little bit of that power, a little bit of that seek to understanding, and it's giving them that attention that they need. When I know that I can grab that talking piece and I'm now in charge of sort of saying something that's from that talking prompt in the respectful way, following those expectations, I have my attention met, I have that voice and choice, and I have that engagement into that classroom. All right, next slide, please. So some of the negatives of the punitive system. The first one that we have on here is the labeling of students. And again, that's a slippery slope, because a lot of times we talk about, Brad and I go around and we talk about the MTSS models and RTI models and your tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 students. A lot of times that's about what supports we can give those students and coming up with those. But we know that sometimes kids find those labels, and what ends up happening with those labels is they feel like that's who they are, that's their identity, that's what they are known for. So if a kid finds out that they went down to the office, and let's say another student in a classroom might be like, well, you're one of the bad kids, I can't sit with you, or something like that, that turns into that label for them, and the punitive system really helps push that label sometimes, unfortunately. The second one there is one of the biggest things that we really push. When a student is removed from school and they do an acting out behavior, and then we don't seek to understand, we don't do any reintegration, we don't really pull in those victims and get that responsibility held, what we're doing is really just putting a Band-Aid on that situation. We're saying, we know you did something wrong, we're gonna give you a punishment for this, but again, that's all we're doing. we do know that sometimes kids may need suspended. Sometimes that does happen with some of the safety, if that's something within your school regulations and, you know, your state laws, that sometimes that does happen. When that does happen, though, there has to be a reintegration component. And, you know, we're going to go over a little bit later. I think Brad's got some stuff about some alternatives to suspension that we're going to be talking about. The next one on here is about the victims. So I like to mention, or like to talk a lot about bullying and what that looks like. If you are a student and you are the victim of someone bullying you, and let's say it gets reported, or you anonymously report it, or somehow it gets to the school admin, and the school admin take action quickly, because again, that is a huge and very serious situation. The admin take that situation seriously. Let's say that bully is removed from the school at that time. What ends up happening is, how does that victim feel when that bully's now out of the school? Do they feel heard? Do they feel like, you know, now everything's going to be fine? Or do they feel a lot more anxiety? I know when I put myself in the bully's shoes, or the victim of someone's being bullied shoes, I would feel very anxious of what's going to happen when they come back. I don't know what those parent conversations are with that bully. I don't know what those, you know, the teachers might be saying to that bully. All I know is they're going to come back into the school and I'm going to be scared. I don't know what's going to happen with that. So sometimes if they do have to be removed from that, you know, the education environment, what can they do to make sure that reintegration is brought in and that victim is a part of that process in some way, shape, or form with those parents' permission? Typically, when we look at the punitive system too, it's not really a teaching tool. We're not seeking to understand. We're not seeing what the deficit areas are. What we end up doing is saying, you did this, and now this is what your punishment is. When we look at a student, let's say they have a reading deficit, or they have something where they, you know, they can't read. If we would say every time they would struggle to read, we would take away the book, how are they going to get to be a better reader? Same thing with behaviors. When a student is acting out, yes, we need to focus on, you know, giving them that attention, and we need to make sure that it's redirected and come up with a logical restorative consequence. But what can we do to really fill up those gaps and make sure they understand how to interact next time? So the three main parts of restorative practices that we like to talk about are, the first one is really focus on relationships. And if you had a chance to read our book, you would know that Brad and I are all about building up relationships with students. When you're building up a relationship with a student, that comes very simple from some of the interactions. We're going to go over some concrete ways to build that, but you really want to start to establish relationships with as many students as possible. The second one is feeding relationships. Anytime that you're interacting with a student in any way, shape, or form, you're feeding that relationship. Are you putting stuff into it, or are you taking away from that relationship with those interactions? We do know students are going to need redirected, but we can do that in a respectful way and always focus on building up that relationship afterwards. That's where that repairing the relationship comes in handy. When a relationship is harmed and there's wrong done, what can we do to build that back up? Sometimes that's that classroom and that's that culture. Sometimes it's with us as an educator or parent, or, you know, just the leader around the student. But what does that look like for them to really work on that relationships and repairing that? And that's true responsibility. If I think about, let's say that Brad and I got into an argument, and then Brad and I just didn't talk for 1 week straight. And then all of a sudden I see Brad again and we act like nothing happened. Nothing's resolved at that situation. It's a band-aid approach. We didn't have to see each other for a little bit, but nothing repaired that, worked that back up. So then next time Brad and I may get into an argument, what's going to happen? It's going to be escalated. There's going to be more situations where, you know, we're going to still be thinking about that situation that was never resolved. That happens with us as educators, with the students. Sometimes that happens with students and students. So anytime that we're focusing on these three ways to focus on relationships, we're really practicing good restorative practices.
All right, we're going to talk about some ways to actually do this and what it looks like and how it works. So let's talk about a few different ways when we're talking about strategies for just going for it. All right, so with implementation, something that we need to do, and a step that's often skipped, is we have to figure out, where are we? So Nathan and I like to do a little activity about how restorative are you. So when we're thinking about that, where am I in restorative practices? What do I know? What do I need? Where do I need to go? And not just me personally, but our school, and not just our school, but our district. So when we're looking at restorative practices, we need to know where everyone is and where we need to go. Now, the mindset is something that's also missed, and this is not just with restorative practice, this is any initiative ever. So a lot of times, things are top-down decisions. Hey, we're starting restorative practices next week, and you're going to do it because of whatever. It could be the best thing ever. You could be like, okay, next week we're going to sell ice cream, and people are going to be mad because you didn't get the flavor they wanted, right? It doesn't matter what it is. You have to get the why. So if people don't understand why restorative practices exist and why we need to do it and how it's going to help kids, it's just going to be more of the same. I'm going to not really commit to it myself because it's just another one of those initiatives that's going to go away in a year or two. We have to actually get people to want to do it. It's not something we can just say, hey, we're going to focus on relationships with kids. We have to let them know why and how. And not only that, but we have to actually show them, and we have to model it in our school. Training and more training. And I would emphasize more training after the other trainings. It's not just something that's a one and done thing. How many times have we gone to a conference over the summer? We went to this really cool session. There was, an hour on student-led learning, or was an hour on this other cool thing. And then we went to our school with all these ideas, and then nothing ever came of it, right? So when we talk about training, it has to be something that's ongoing, something that happens all the time, something that becomes a priority. You can't just start restorative practices and then start another initiative on math and start another initiative on social emotional learning and then start another initiative on all these other factors. It needs to be a focus, because the reality is, if kids don't actually feel connected, if kids don't actually feel like they're part of the community, part of the environment that they're in, the academics aren't going to matter. You've heard the Maslow before Bloom kind of thing, right? So it's one of those things where if you want to improve test scores, make the kids feel welcome. Make the kids feel like they belong. And you can't just tell teachers, we're going to start restorative practices tomorrow. If you're going to say, we're going to go and do this, that means you have to actually have some training. And that can come from us. That can come from someone else. It can come from people in the building. They really know what they're doing. But you can't just say to a teacher, go and build relationships, and then we'll see you next week. We can't just say to the teacher, well, just go and repair the harm if a kid does something. We've actually seen restorative practices go not well at all, because the people that were trying to do it didn't actually know what they were doing. They thought they meant well, but the reality is, it takes time, it takes training. It's not just a one and done kind of event. You can't go to an hour seminar and then be fluent in restorative practices. One of the other things that are really important, when we talk about alternatives to suspension, a suspension, what does that teach a kid is the first thing I want to think about. So when you do a suspension, or you put a kid in ISS or things like that, what are you teaching that kid? You're teaching that kid one thing. If you do something, there's a consequence, right? So basically, there are consequences to my actions, or what I learned from a suspension. But the reality is, if I am late to school, and my consequence for being late to school is you're going to put me in a detention or put me in an ISS, I am missing more school because I was missing school. So what sense does that make, right? So if I have some sort of outburst in class, the solution is kick me out of class. The reality is, I'm going to go back into class and have no idea how to control my emotion next time. And in fact, it's going to be worse because I don't like that teacher now, and that teacher doesn't like me, and that's what I feel. And Nathan, I know a lot of kids have come to you and be like, man, Miss Robinson or Mr. Jones does not like me. And the reality is, that kid comes back into the room and nothing's repaired, nothing's restored, and the kid doesn't have mechanisms. Who knows why that kid exploded? That kid could have exploded because they didn't get to have a bed last night. That kid could have exploded because their girlfriend broke up with them. That kid could have exploded because they're behind in math. They don't understand what's going on, and you called at me and you embarrassed me in front of my peers. You have no clue at the why behind that behavior. So we're talking about some alternatives to suspension, some things that actually might help. So suppose you have two kids that are not getting along. Like, one kid is talking about that other kid on Instagram. That other kid is talking about the other kid on Instagram. They're planning on, there's no problem solving skills going on. The only way to resolve it is to fight, right? That's the only way you can solve this if somebody's talking about you, is to fight them and things like that. So when we look at something like mediation, how do we bring the stakeholders into the room? So you have the kids, you potentially have their parents, you potentially have other stakeholders involved. How do you get the kids together to seek to understand what's actually going on? And Nathan, how many times in your office did you bring kids together and you found out something you didn't know completely, and then the kid didn't know that other kid was really mad that you called him this name because some sort of outside factor? So when you brought them to your office, wasn't it quite often the kids learned stuff about each other and misunderstood each other in the first place, and that's why they were beefing?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, and even when you and I have traveled around and we've done practice circles, we've heard, staff find out stuff that they never even knew about, staff they've been working with a lot of times. So when you're doing some of these, restorative justice conferencing and these, formalized mediations, where you've let parents know what's going on and you're sitting down, you're squashing the beef or, whatever the terminology is at the current time, what you're really doing there is you're getting context of the situation and you're letting everyone in the room that's part of that situation understand that context too. Because like what you were saying, if you don't know what's going on, you may just assume based off of the factors that you know in your head. And there's been so many times as an educator that, it's taken me so many times to trip and fall to realize that, because when you go into a situation, you may say, I know exactly what's going on. I know you guys are still Snapchatting. I know this person's involved. I know, I saw you down at the end of the hallway. I saw this happening. You may know all this stuff in your head. There's been so many times that I've tripped and found out there's all these other factors that I had no idea about. And that's why, something that we put into the book that I really push out a lot of times is this iceberg activity, really break it down to seeking to understand, because sometimes the students don't even know. Sometimes when we're driving in our car and we start feeling anxious and we're like, man, something's going on. Did I leave the oven on? Did this happen? Am I skipping a meeting right now? What's going on? Sometimes it takes us a long time as adults with fully developed brains to try to figure out what's driving sort of our anxiety. Kids have that amplified. So when they're dealing with anger and they're dealing with sadness and they're dealing with this, they may not know all these other factors going on. So it's our job during that mediation, prior to them even walking into the room, to try to seek to understand and really drive what that conversation is looking like.
And when we're thinking about that in the mediations, we're driving empathy. Kids need to seek to understand each other. We need to help them do that. You're not born with empathy. I always like to say it's not one of the emotions in the movie Inside Out. Like, empathy wasn't one of the characters. We have to actually build an understanding and build a way that kids can learn to communicate what it is, and not problem solve. They're not problem solving at all sometimes. All they're thinking is, how am I going to stop that kid from talking about me? And they don't know how to actually solve it between that kid without it getting more serious. Something else that Nathan and I are really proud of that have had some really good recent results with is something called the zone. So the zone is something where, okay, suppose a kid did something and, you kick the kid out of class, the kid has ISS, they sit in ISS all day. Like, what does sitting in a room all day do for you? And there's actually some recent research coming out that says social isolation actually has a very negative effect. It actually is one of the worst things you can do when it comes to discipline. Okay, to social isolation. So when it comes to that, if I sit in a room all day, I'm doing nothing. I'm not being productive. I'm away from my friends. But why am I in that room? If I have a skill gap where I don't know how to get to class on time, I don't know how to do this math problem, I don't know how to resolve a fight with my friends, how is sitting in a room going to solve any of that? That'd be like a kid not knowing how to read, like Nathan mentioned. And if a kid doesn't know how to read, the solution to get that kid to read better is go put that kid in a room by themselves for a long period of time. It just doesn't make sense, really. So when we think about something like the zone, what we would do instead of an ISS would be, we would gather some kids together that might have otherwise gone to ISS or might have otherwise had some other need. And when the kids go into the zone, the first thing they do is they'll do a little self-reflection, and they'll have to actually own up to, like, why am I in here? Like, why am I going to the zone? What is it that I did? Who did I affect by my actions? How am I going to fix this with the people that I harmed, kind of thing? So the kids come in, they self-reflect first, because we want kids to start thinking before they get into the group. Then we'll sit the kids in a circle. Again, circles have many uses, but this is also used in the zone. And the zone is where we get to the heart of things, where kids get to speak about what they did, why they're in there. Kids get to build off of other kids, and they get to actually hear what other kids are going through and how other kids resolve their issues. And kids often, we think about kids as not really have, if we give the kids a path and we give them a voice, we actually have kids sitting in there who are like, here's what I would do. Here's what I would do. Here's a good way I think you can resolve that with that other person. So you actually have the kids who are in there for a behavior problem helping some of the other kids resolve issues, and that's when it's very powerful. The main thing is that the kids are talking, it's not the adult talking, and the kids are talking through their problems, and the kids are gaining skills in that situation. So towards the end of the zone, that's when they do a little self-reflection piece, and they kind of think about, what went into that behavior in the first place. Like Nathan was saying before, he's had issues, and I've had issues where I didn't even realize what was driving that behavior. The reality is that I was overwhelmed. So when you see the tip of the iceberg, you only see the behavior itself. Sometimes the kids don't know why they did it. And then when they start to self-reflect at the end, they realize that I was really upset when that person called me this because, I had a fight with my mom last night, or my mom's boyfriend moved in. There's some kind of thing that I'm mad about, but I didn't realize that's what caused me to be so short-sighted in my behavior. So the zone is a really powerful tool, and it's not sitting in there all day. It's just sitting in there for an hour and actually talking through issues. And something else that's really important too, I like to say this because I was a building principal and I was also a district level administrator. If you're going to do restorative practices, it's not just the teachers, it's not just the administrators with kids. If it's good practice for kids, it's good practice for adults. So for instance, today I saw a session with Paul Bloomberg, who's the CEO of Core Collaborative, and we were talking about something dealing with learning. And we're talking about how do we have students take agency? How do we give students voice and choice? How do we have students direct their own learning? But then we tell the adults, hey, here's what you need to do in this order, in this way. So I was thinking, okay, same thing with restorative practices. If a teacher does something they shouldn't do, shouldn't we do a mediation with that teacher, and shouldn't we seek to understand the behavior of that teacher? And in staff meetings, we should be doing circle up in staff meetings. We should be doing community building out there, in our staff meetings. Like the principals should be going and trying to build relationships with their teachers. So the people modeling the restorative practices should be the administrators, and the same thing with the district and your policies in your school. You have to have policies that match what's important to you. You have to have people modeling those behaviors. And it's not just something we do to the kids or with the kids. It's a way of being. It's a mindset.
And then, Isaac, I would like to take a moment before we jump into this one to get some questions in. I've been reading the chat, and I've seen so many, good things pop up, and even a lot of stuff that Brad was saying. Other people in the chat were like, we start off our staff meetings in circles, and I saw another quote that I wrote down real quick that said, "Discipline is a stereotype" by Colleen, and there's so many great things going on in the chat. So let's take a couple minutes to go through that.
Yeah, and related to that idea of discipline being a stereotype or even having certain visuals that can go with it, there's a few people who brought up this issue that when they are trying to help support others in their school, or they're taking these next steps with restorative practices, they have discipline being contrasted with loving and caring for students. And so I think they might have wanted a few comments from you guys on that.
Yeah, and Brad, what's your favorite quote around love and
Or about the time one?
Yes.
Okay. I have never said this quote correctly in my entire life. I just want to point that out there. So basically it's by Pam Leo, and we're going to spend the time either building relationships with kids and front loading those relationships and actually working with the kid, or we're going to spend time dealing with their unmet needs. So we're going to spend time calling home. We're going to spend time disciplining them. We're going to spend time calling the principal, emailing parents. Either way, we're going to spend the time. So we might as well spend the time in a proactive nature with that kid and build them up instead of kicking that kid out of class when something goes down. Because the reality is, the more we build that kid up, the more that kid's on our team, the more that kid knows that we care about them and they care about us, the more they feel like they're part of the classroom, the less likely they are to hurt that classroom environment in the first place. So the reality is that if we spend more of our time up front with that kid is not going to be doing the same thing in September as they're doing in June.
Yeah, and I really think too, when you're thinking about sort of that contrast, when you're teaching a student, some of those areas about how to interact, how to do conflict resolution, how to have good communication with someone, you are showing them love. You're showing them a way to use those skills and be successful down the road. I have a 5-year-old son, and I love him to death, and I would love to cuddle with him and watch cartoons all night and just hang out eating popcorn, but that's not really love. That's me being a friend with him, but that's not really teaching him how to keep track and keep doing this type of stuff. So, there's this type where you have to set those expectations. You have to have good dynamics and healthy relationships with your students, but you have to hold them accountable at the same time. And that's teaching. That's looking at them and saying, I care about you. I want you to be successful down the road. saying, I care about you, so I'm gonna let you slide and get away with this and this and this. That's not real. That's not teaching. That's teaching them ways to manipulate a system or get away with it. So again, we got to be very careful on that slope. And on the opposite side of that is punitive, saying you did this wrong. I'm not going to talk to you about it. I don't want to hear what you got to say. You go sit over there and I'll talk to you when I'm ready, or something like that. That's taking everything out of that equation. There's so many different ways that we can reframe that when we're talking to a kid to help and be trauma informed and think about their development of their brain and where they're at that current time to really help those situations. And the visual I like to do is when you see a kid that's acting out, they're already right here. As my job as an educator, I want to come there and I want to get them back down, but I never want to bring that up a level and keep them going up and up and up. We all have stories where, you know, it's started out from something small, and then a student got triggered or upset, and then it turned into something so big. And then reflecting back at that myself as an educator and working with kids for, you know, over 11 years now, I think, and I'm like, what could I have done differently? How could I have shown them that I'm there for them? I'm going to hold them accountable. I'm going to be, you know, make sure this is known, but I can do this a little bit different. And like Brad was saying, the time component's the same. The time component's the same. With the restorative practices, there's the mediations, there's the conferences that do take a little bit additional time. And we're very cognizant of what that looks like. But again, when you're investing that time, you're going to get that paid back out.
Yeah, and back to what Nathan said a minute ago, because he brought up his son. With my son, who's 6, my son asked if we could watch a show. It was like 9:00 at night, and again, I was cuddling with my son, and he's 6, and he should have gone to bed. Right, it's 9:00 on a school night, but I let him watch a show because, you know, it was father-son bonding time. You know how many nights in a row I fought with him about watching a show. After that, because I let him break the rule and I let him break the expectation, and then I spent a whole lot of time preparing that. So you have to be the adult, like Nathan was saying. You have to set the boundaries, and you have to hold kids to the boundaries. And it's just funny because I fought that battle for at least a week, and he still brings it up to this day.
I have a feeling there's a few hundred people out there doing what I did, which was trying to control their laughter because we knew exactly where you were going with that.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you guys so much for taking the time to respond to some of these. One trend that has come up throughout that I don't think you need to respond to now because I know you're getting to it in these strategies, but just as you share these, if you can kind of mention some of the successes you've had and how you've used some of these strategies with those students who have they've been referred to in different ways, like high flyers or frequent offenders or habitual offenders, or, you know, things, or just students who have habitual behaviors that are getting in the way of learning. But I know you need to keep moving on, but if you'll kind of keep that in your mind.
Yeah, and I think it's a good time to sort of, you know, talk about that right now, because I know, you know, we read articles all the time. We see stuff on Twitter, on Facebook about educators that are frustrated with, you know, what we like to say is sort of that tier 3 of the MTSS or RTI model, the students that may need a little bit more attention, what that looks like, because again, a lot of times that does take away from the learning environment of other students. And again, it should be a small population of your students, a small population of your school. So sometimes they do need a little bit more time invested in them and what that looks like. A lot of times, you know, it's about breaking into their shell, because their shell a lot of times is disrespect, pushing, and these other behaviors that we would, you know, have an emotional response to, because that's very easy, and that's something that they turn to a lot of the times. So it's about breaking into that shell and saying, I care about you, let's get past this. It takes time, it takes patience. You know, when I am talking to a student that I've never known, and again, you know, Brad and I was just in Lauderdale, Tennessee, and the principal pulled me aside in the middle of a presentation. In the middle, Brad was talking, he said, hey, and he waved towards me, and I said, Brad, I'll be back in a minute. And I ended up staying with him for about an hour and a half. And, you know, it was a student that's been down in the office multiple times. It was about to be his final, you know, one of his final suspensions at that time, because there's been a lot of stuff going on. And he goes, you know, what should you do? And I go, let me just talk to him. I go, I'll sort of show you what I do. And I walked in there and I first introduced myself and just said, hey, is it cool if I talk to you for a moment? And he said no at first, and that's real, you know? And I said, that's fine. Can I just sit over here? And he goes, that's fine. After about 2 minutes, I said, hey, can I talk to you? I think I can just I just want to figure out what's going on. He goes, yeah. So then at that time, I looked at myself as, I'm a detective. I don't know this kid. I don't know what's going on. I'm going to treat him respectfully, and I'm going to try to seek to understand what's driving this. Like I said, it took about an hour. We ended up having 4 different students. I would, you know, he would stay in the room. I would walk out, talk to another student with the principal. Then I would figure out that side of the story, then bring him back in, then squash that situation. And I did this a couple different times. It turned out it was something going on with you know, his baby and his girlfriend. And, you know, the principal really had no idea at that time. And he looked over at me later and he goes, "I've never went that deep." He goes, "I was ready to suspend him and then suspend those 3 other students." And he's like, you know, we were able to save 4 suspensions, and all of the students at that time walked out and they were happy and they were more engaged with each other. And, you know, it's not that it's something magical, and sometimes it backfires, sometimes it does, but sometimes with these students, it's about just talking to them and respectfully and saying, "I have no idea what's going on. I'm just gonna be honest. I think I might know, but you know, I'm gonna give you a couple minutes to think about it. What can I do to support you at this time? You know, what's going on? What do you need?" You know, I walked in there, and when I was sitting there, I go, "Hey, do you need a bottle of water?" Anything that to try to break into that shell a little bit for him to respect me enough that he can start talking to me. Sometimes you have those situations. Other times you have a student in your class that continually acts out and disrupts the class, and you know, people may label that as a class clown behavior. And what sort of stuff does that look like? And punitive stuff doesn't work with those type of situations a lot of times. And I think, you know, most people that's listening could attest to that they've tried different, you know, maybe bringing them down to the office or having this stuff involved. So what does that really look like? And that's where this repairing the harm, some of these concrete strategies that, you know, I know Brad and I don't have a ton of time, but this is where you start to hold them truly responsible for their actions in a respectful, loving way. That's what restorative practice is about. It's about saying, you're doing this wrong, and I'm going to hold you directly responsible for it. If I throw food in the cafeteria and I make a huge mess in the cafeteria and I get sent to in-school suspension, and I sit there by myself for, you know, the entire day thinking about my behavior, I really wasn't invested in that situation still. I really don't, you know, it didn't really matter to me too much. But if I say I threw food in the cafeteria and then that assistant principal walks me down to the cafeteria, then I spend 30 minutes or an hour cleaning up every inch of that cafeteria because I messed up that cafeteria. I'm going to now have empathy for those people working in that cafeteria that may have had to clean up my mess. I'm going to have empathy for anyone sort of involved in that process. And next time, I'm not going to want to throw food in that cafeteria as much because I understand what happens when I throw food. We look at behavior as throwing a rock in a pond, and there's all these ripples that happen. And we know that as adults about what those ripples look like. We know if a kid, you know, yells a profanity in a classroom, what the ripples is of that class and how to get them back on track. Students don't understand those ripples, and that's about teaching that empathy, but doing it in a respectful way. So giving them that voice to talk and being respectful to them, as well as holding them directly accountable for their actions. And directly being accountable isn't being sent down to the office and having nothing to reintegrate you back in or repair the harm with you guys as educators where they harmed, the class that they harmed, or whatever that may look like.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. All right, so we'll go ahead and dive into some concrete strategies for the classroom. So we like to talk about this everywhere we go. And this statistic is from the IIRP, the International Institute of Restorative Practices. What they found with behavior management and restorative practices is it's 80% of the time proactive. That's building up relationships with your students, talking to them respectfully, building up this culture, making them feel safe. We know in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that's that second to bottom tier, that safety. We want them to feel safe. When they feel safe, they're going to be less likely to act out. Like Brad also said, when a student is invested into a classroom or a culture or even that cafeteria that I was giving an example of, I'm less likely to ruin that or act out in that. And that's the number one way to drop down recidivism, negative behaviors, and getting investment into something. So, you know, a lot of times when I hear stuff about restorative practices that might be negative, or people are asking me questions that say like, oh, I read this or I heard this, they're focusing on this 20% of the time, this reactive nature. And if you only focus on the reactive time, only when the kid's getting, you know, trouble or something starts acting out, you're missing it. Because again, you know, what the studies are showing is you have to work on this proactive nature. 20% of the time, you are going to have to repair the harm, talk to them, seek to understand, mediations, conferences, and really build those students back up. All right. So something, you know, Brad and I like to do, a concrete skill to start immediately building up relationships and being proactive and working on that 80% is welcoming the students by name when they walk into your classroom. We see, you know, I see these videos all the time of these really fancy handshakes and all this stuff. And I mean, I personally can't remember one handshake, so I'm not going to be able to really remember how to do that. But, you know, kudos to those teachers that can. But if you can stand in front of your door and just say, you know, hey, Brad, thanks for coming in. Hey, Isaac, thanks for coming in. And just welcome them by their name. That's going to increase engagement into that classroom. That's going to increase that relationship with them. A lot of times students don't hear their name unless they're in trouble. And what we know with some of our students that might be coming from homes that might not be as supportive is they may not hear their name for a couple days, is what some of the new studies are coming out and showing. So the more that we can recognize them by their name, say their name correctly at the door, get them in there, we're going to increase engagements. We're going to work on the 80% of the proactive and just get, you know, that healthier classroom.
Something I want to add to what you said, Nathan, is that the research is strong. It says that you can increase engagement by more than 20% and reduce behaviors by more than 9% by doing that. That leads to an hour more of engagement per day for that teacher. An hour. So if we can spend some time outside of our door and we can welcome kids in that room, we're going to actually gain more engaged kids in the classroom, and we're going to be able to teach more things and do more learning than if we didn't. So you're investing that time and you're buying back a whole lot more time for learning.
Thanks for adding that. All right, circles. And, you know, I'm not going to be able to make you guys all experts in circles in the next 5 minutes, but, you know, I'll try my best. I'm just kidding. So circles are a really important way for proactive natures. And, you know, when we're talking about concrete strategies to start right away, you know, we have a chapter in the book, Circle Up, and it really focuses on what a circle looks like and launching that circle. There's a lot of different variances and different ways that you can do circles in the classroom. The biggest one that I would, you know, challenge you to start with once you feel ready and you've read that or you've been training this or what this looks like, it's just simply having culture building in that circle. When you come up with your expectations, you want them to be very clear and you want them to be sensitive to the needs of all your students. We don't want to have rules. And, you know, we have a chapter in the book that's Brad's favorite chapter, throwing out the rules because he wrote that one. And, you know, what we want to do with these expectations are be broad and really focus on keeping that a healthy and good dynamic of that circle. When we're doing a circle, it's not about having SEL and social emotional learning, strategies that we're talking about every single time, or really diving in really deep about tell me a time that you've been sad or something like that. You don't really have to focus on that. What we want to focus on with circles is just building up that classroom culture where they can feel heard and they can, you know, hear other people. There's a lot of students out there that are the quieter students too. You know, one of our good friends, Phyllis Bagel, we were talking to her recently when she was writing her book, and, you know, we were trying to brainstorm about some of these kids that may be quiet and how to engage them and what that looks like. And let's say that I'm in the classroom and I'm a very quiet student. And I feel very alone. And we know, especially with middle school, younger kids, even in high school, a lot of times they don't understand what is normal with their feelings and what that looks like. So let's say I feel alone and I'm in that classroom, and the teacher asks, what's your favorite animal? And that's a very common thing that, you know, an icebreaker activity or something going around the room, maybe not even in a circle. And my favorite animal is snails. And I know I'm never going to say snails because everyone's going to laugh at me and everyone's going to think I'm weird. So I'm not going to ever mention snails. But then Brad's sitting across from me and he's outgoing. He loves to be heard, loves to get his voice out there. So then Brad goes, I love snails. I look over at him. I may not instantly be like, hey, we're best friends and go fist bump him, but I know I'm not alone anymore. I know there's a connection with someone else in that classroom that I may have not known exists. I probably thought I was the only one in the world that loves snails. Now I know there's other people out there that love snails. What that does is increases that culture of that classroom, and me as a student that might be quiet helps me feel more buy-in to that situation. We also know that students that start to act out in classrooms, when we're looking at those 3 reasons they're, you know, acting out, you know, sometimes they're doing it for that attention, that power, what that looks like. If I see a student start acting out in my classroom or even in the circle, you know, I'm going to redirect that behavior, but then I'm going to encourage them. I'm going to empower them. My next circle, I'm going to have you come up with a circle prompt. I'm going to have you sort of run this circle, get that investment into them, and have them do it for a couple days in a row, not just one. What ends up happening, now they're invested into that circle and they're not going to want to harm it again. Because like we were saying, the number one way to drop down that, you know, recidivism is getting them to be part of that circle or part of what they don't want to break down. All right. So consistency is key. You know, you want to have really good school-wide expectations around the building that everyone's aware of. If, you know, I allow headphones to be in as the assistant principal, and then the principal says, no headphones, and that teacher over there says, yes, you can have headphones, this one doesn't, I'm not going to have really good of what I should be doing with my headphones, for one. Second is I'm going to learn more manipulation than anything. I'm going to take out my headphones when I walk past a certain person, put them back in when I'm walking past another person, and that just teaches them how to get away with certain staff members doing something, certain staff members don't. So, you know, when you're talking about concrete ways to get stuff going. Make sure those expectations are clear and consistent around the building. Another thing that we talk about a lot is preview, warn, consequence. When you see a misbehavior in the classroom and you want to redirect that, you don't want to use shame, you don't want to embarrass the students, because again, the student might already be up here. We don't want to trigger that. We want to keep the small situation small. The first way to do that is preview your expectations. Having your expectations posted, saying, remember, there's no cell phones to be used in this class. You don't have to specifically say it to that student. You're just saying that to the class. So then you're not triggering off anxiety or opposition. If you see that student still on their cell phone, that's when you want to give a respectful warning to them. You want to try to do this away from their peers. And I know, being in that classroom, that's tough. Sometimes it's tough to pull them aside or get them away from their peers, but as much as possible, because you never want to embarrass them or make them feel shame for those different behaviors. So then I'd give them a warning and say, hey, I saw you're still on your cell phone. You have to have that away. If I see it again, it's going to be pouched. That's something that I did, or, taken away. So, and if you see the student again on their cell phone, that's when you give out that consequence, it's a lot easier. They already know it's coming. They already know what the warning was. It was very clear. And that consequence, you want to make sure isn't your biggest consequence right away. You don't want to say, if I see that cell phone again, I'm calling mom, I'm sitting down in the office, I'm doing this, because then if they do anything else, you sort of used up all of your, consequences at that time. So you want to start small. And then if you see a behavior continuing, that's when you're going to tier those consequences. Same thing with the repairing the harm that we're going to hit on in just a moment. But, you want to start out small and then tier that up. Brad, you want to talk a little bit about teacher clarity?
Sure. Teacher clarity, something that I'm very big on, and not just me, but what the research says, John Hattie, Visible Learning, one of the biggest factors in student achievement is teacher clarity. So do students know what's expected of them? When you come into the room, do students know what they're supposed to do? Are they held to doing what they're supposed to do? So when I've seen classrooms where I walked in, there was no directions on the board. There was nothing. The teacher took attendance 8 minutes in the class. The students didn't know what was expected. There was no internal summary. So basically, you should start every lesson with, here's what we're doing. We're going to do this first, this second, this third, and this fourth. And when you're doing your classroom lesson, you say, okay, you have 30 seconds. We're going to transition into this next, or coming up is going to be this. So keep on telling them what's happening and what's coming, previewing what's going to happen. And the students know how to be successful. Like, the students need to know, here's how I'm going to be assessed. Here's the expectations that are in my room. So there's a lot of students that have a lot of anxiety, and there's students that have, some sort of thing going on where they need to know exactly what's expected of them and be held to it. And it needs to be very clear. And in a lot of cases, it's not. Like, students don't do well when it's not clear of what they're supposed to do and what's expected of them. And it's not just teacher clarity in their room, it's from room to room. So in one room, we're talking about school expectations, like you were saying, it's clarity. A cell phone's okay in this room, but it's not okay in that room. But this person's okay if you use it in a limited way. Same thing with earphones, walking in the hallways. Everything needs to be consistent as much as possible, and students need to know what to do. And if they know what to do, they can meet those expectations. If they don't know what to do, they're going to get very frustrated when they get called out for doing something that was okay in another room.
And also, establishing routines is very important, especially when you start doing circles. You want to keep as much time towards, your lessons and engaging with your students as possible. So teaching those routines and putting in that investment into what that routine looks like, especially for the younger kids, now it's time to read. We're going to be reading over here at the circle, at the carpet. We're going to move over there in the next 3 minutes. Okay, 3, 2, 1, go. We got 10 seconds to get over there. Whatever that looks like, establish those routines and practice those routines. Again, when you're practicing routines or some of those other things that we were talking about, that's investing into that success of that classroom. So repairing the harm is a very important part of restorative practices. That is some of the 20% of the reactive time. In our chapter about repairing the harm, we go over the design thinking with the initiate, empathize, et cetera, about how to look at repairing the harm. When you're looking at a basic of what's going on, when you see someone act out, this could be with a student, this could be with, a child, anyone, you got to think about who they affected and what can they do to fix it with them. That's what it is in a simple way. Who did they affect? What can they do to fix it with them? On any age level, it doesn't matter, adults, children, anyone. It's got to keep it simple. When you start making it simple, you still are holding them accountable for it. And a lot of times, let's say they may say something that isn't really repairing the harm, or they really have no idea how to repair the harm. That's when you're going to start asking some of these prompting questions. So let's say that a student, takes a pencil and he throws it across the room and it almost hits another kid in the head. You pull him aside and you said, hey, you almost hit him in the head. That could have really hurt him, but it didn't. But you almost could have hurt him. No, it didn't hit him. Okay, that's fine. You're going to push and push and push and ask some of these opening questions and say, how do you think that, so I understand it didn't hurt him. I understand it didn't hit him. I'm just going to ask you a couple questions. How do you think his mom would feel if I called her up right now and say, hey, your son just got their eye poked out? How do you think she would feel? How do you think your mom would feel if I called her up and say, hey, your son was being silly, he threw a pencil across the room and he knocked out someone's eye? How do you think she would feel? Those are questions to start, getting that empathy to be built up around that student so they understand the implications of their actions or what could be of their actions. That's what's going to start building that back up. Once you go past that, then you can go into, okay, now how can we fix it? You're going to have to coach a lot of the times when they're first getting started. You want to start out small. A lot of times it may be face-to-face apologies or saying, why you did a certain behavior with that apology. You want to role play those and make sure they're sincere. And you also never want to push someone to an apology, because if you do, they're going to go up to them and say, sorry, and walk away. That's not real. No one feels better. Sometimes that might make the situation worse. So when you're coaching them about ways they can repair the harm, you never want to say apologize, or you never want to say this. You want to coach them towards that through open-ended questions. If they start to get off track, that's when you're going to use one of those closed-ended questions to get them back going again. All right. And again, this takes time. This is back to sort of Brad's quote with, Pam Leo's quote that Brad was, reciting. We really want to invest the time in building up those relationships with those students. All right.
And like I said, it's so worth it, Nathan. Like the thing is that, like I said, you're going to spend the time. You're going to spend the time redirecting behaviors. You're going to spend the time contacting them out for those misbehaviors. It's just, we need to view it as an investment in time. And I'm going to reemphasize again, I'll say it 80 times. It's an investment. You buy time back, and that time you have with kids is better, because the time you have with kids is when you have engaged, productive learners that feel safe and welcome and want to be there. So it does take time, and it's going to take a lot of time at first, but don't give up. And it's going to take a while for kids to change their behaviors, but it's going to be so worth it when that breakthrough happens.
Thank you guys so much. We are getting questions as we're going, and as you noted earlier, so many of the questions that were being asked, or so many of the ideas that are being suggested came up through the presentation. One quick thing that's easy to hit is somebody asked, is this being recorded? Yes, and we'll share it on YouTube under the Core Collaboratives page. Anybody who signed up for this will send you a follow-up email, or you can reach out to Isaac@thecorecollaborative.com, and I'll be happy to send you a link. Also, we're going to keep this excellent chat transcript, and I'll go through and just remove names, but then keep this great record of your conversation. I'm looking for some patterns in these questions because there's so many great thoughts. I'd say the number one big pattern is we have principals, coaches, teachers, et cetera, asking the same question, which is, how do we get everyone to move forward with this? There's been a couple of little specifics about it, like how can we support each other? Where can we get support? And then any suggestions for doing a book study for some people who've said they've already bought Hacking School Discipline. I will want some recommendations for that.
Yeah, definitely. And that's an awesome question. I think the number one way to get going, and Brad sort of hit this, is you want to start on those mindsets. You want to start thinking, these are kids when they're acting up. They're not giving me a hard time, they're having a hard time. So anytime we start putting this lens up and understanding that, that's going to really start opening the door up to, okay, now I understand that. Now what's some strategies I can start doing? The first strategy you want to start working on is building up those relationships. With those studies coming back and saying it's 80% of the time the proactive nature, you want to start on those relationships. And then you want to start small. When you go through the book, or you get someone coming in to help you train, or what that would look like, you really want to start out small with those practices and really get those staff going with it as much as possible. When it comes down to, yeah, go ahead.
I do want to add, it's great if everyone's on the same page and that's what you're going towards and that's the goal. But sometimes you need to grassroots movement and you need to be the change. Like you can start doing some of these strategies in your classroom right now. Some of the things you can do tomorrow is going to take a little bit of time. But I've seen some teachers, and shout out to one of our favorites, Sarah Silber. She is really doing this very well in her classroom and working really hard to make it not just a classroom, a school, but a district-wide initiative when we're talking about these practices. So it's one of those things where we want everyone on board, but don't wait for your building principal, don't wait for your superintendent to say we're doing restorative practices. You can start doing some of these things tomorrow, and some of these things are going to take a whole lot of time. You're going to fail a ton. You're going to have a whole lot of situations that don't go as planned, but start trying a few things now. Like you can start trying a few things like circles, try repairing the harm on a smaller scale, and then model the change, be the change. And if you need additional supports and some training, then you talk to your administrator about it. And then the administrator might talk to your superintendent about it. But don't sit there and wait for your superintendent to come say, we're doing restorative practices for you to do anything.
And it's funny, just as you started to talk about that, Sue Ann and then some others mentioned similar experiences that they had one or two people or a small group get started, they supported that. And then, as you mentioned, it was a grassroots movement. It's really taken hold. We have so many great thoughts and questions coming in. Do you guys have anything else you want to hit before we wrap up? A big thing you want to end with or something on your mind?
Yeah, I mean, feel free to reach out to us at any time. You know, I know we put up our contact information on Twitter and you got our emails. You know, Brad and I are, you know, we're all about connecting and, you know, helping out and brainstorming around, you know, what's going on with students. Also, you know, Brad hit this too. We got a Facebook group called Hacking School Discipline. You know, we have about 25,000 educators in it, which is an awesome platform. And again, you don't just hear from Brad and I, you hear from other people in the field on every level that's tried restorative practice or they tried different approaches than discipline, and they're brainstorming with each other about what that looks like. You know, we really believe iron sharpens iron. So when you're looking at, you know, what you're doing, if it's going well, share it out. You know, Brad and I have been lucky enough to have this platform to talk to you guys, but I know there's so many people out there. They're doing amazing things. So feel free to reach out. We'd love to, you know, see what you're doing in our Facebook group for sure.
Thank you, guys. As we begin to wrap up, we'd love to know your biggest takeaway. You can put that in the chat. We would also love for you to post that out on Facebook, Twitter, and use the hashtag Hacking School Discipline. This has been a wonderful hour of learning for me. And we've had about 200 people in this chat throughout the night. We've got far more than that out on Facebook. We have 25,000 in the Hacking School Discipline Facebook group, and so many of you have shared you have this positive intent, you have this willingness to work together, you have these powerful questions, you're willing to be vulnerable, and you have outstanding solutions and a willingness to share, as they just mentioned. And that means we do have the force to be the change. If there was 100 of us, I would be confident of that, but if there's 25,000 of us, certainly we can do this. So please do reach out to them. I've only known Nathan and Brad now for a little while, but I will tell you they are genuine. They say they want to connect and they mean it. So grab your phone, take a quick picture, a screenshot of that. Gives you many ways to keep in touch with them and keep connected. And we hope you'll do the same with us at the Core Collaborative. I cannot thank everyone enough who's joined us, and of course, Nathan and Brad for giving their time and sharing their expertise. Next month, we join another amazing author and consultant, Starra Saxstein, and she's going to be really talking about how to build your brand as an educator. There's so much being said about education on social media and other forms of media, and so similar to this group, we need to take a little bit of charge of that and share out the amazing things you're doing. She's got some powerful strategies to help with that. We're also beginning our core chat. I'm really excited about this. And February 4th, Starra kicks this off as well. So start following core chat. You can find out more on thecorecollaborative.com. We're always interested to hear what it is you're focused on. What are you learning? What are you developing? Because we have such a powerful community of people like Nathan and Brad and all of the amazing people who've joined us in the chat. That we may not be the expert, but we know someone who is. This has been the theme, I think, of these last few minutes. We have power when we pull together. We hope you'll check out this excellent book, Pure Power. It's a great tie-in to the ideas in hacking school discipline, that when we partner with students, we partner with our colleagues, and we build these relationships, unbelievable things can happen. With that in mind, there's something special about being face-to-face today and tomorrow. I know some of you are in Nevada seeing some of our amazing people. Here's other great chances to partner with us. Take a quick picture of that if you want, or as always, find out on the corecollaborative.com /events. Something that is good, not just for the mind, but the soul, is this event we have every year called Mind Fueled. And this year it's focused on personalized learning, going to be a great time and place for you to come and learn and be together and be this change you want to be. We've moved this time from beautiful San Diego to beautiful Vail. And to make it even more possible for those of you out there to join, we've started a Mind Fueled scholarship. Anyone who completes this application process, which is simply filling out a brief application, submitting a 2-minute video to share about you, and then filling out a form that says it's okay that we use your video, you get 20% off your registration. And we're very excited to announce that we're going to bring a team of 3 out, all expenses paid. We're going to pay your airfare, your transportation, your stay at the Grand Hyatt in Vail, as well as cover your registration. So just as we began, we are a collaborative. Please reach out, join Brad and Nathan and 25,000 of their closest friends on the Hacking School Discipline Facebook group, and join us and our friends on the Leading Impact Teams Facebook group. Share your successes, share your questions. We would love to be a part of this with you. I'll make sure that we give you access to the book study, because that's coming up in the chat, and anything else you need, please reach out anytime. Thank you for sticking it out with us. Nathan and Brad, I can't say again, thank you so much for your time and expertise and your openness. And to all of you out there, thank you for sharing your 2 most valuable assets, your time and your attention. And we will see you next month.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.